Welcome in, everybody, to the CFB Nation All-America podcast presented by Twisted Tea. I'm Bill Troche, senior editor at sportingnews.com, alongside Bill Bender, our national college football writer at sportingnews.com. You can follow Bill on Twitter at BillBender92, and you can follow me at Bill Troche, and keep an eye on the main Sporting News account at Sporting News. If you enjoy this podcast, please give us a 5-star rating and submit a brief review. That would be very helpful for us. Thanks to Bryan Driskell of Irish Breakdown for joining us today. Bryan, happy Halloween and welcome in.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys. I'm looking forward to talking about this. I always have very strong opinions about this topic. And tonight I'm going to definitely have some strong opinions.
We're glad you're here. As everybody knows, the College Football Selection Committee unveiled their top 25 rankings for the weekend, their initial rankings. They're going to do it every Tuesday night up until Selection Sunday after the regular season wraps up. And we have our top 25 that they released about an hour ago. And so we'll go back through the top 25. We'll go 25 down to 11. Then we'll kind of break it up and get your guys' thoughts on who's too high, who's too low. I know Mr. Driskell has some opinions, and that's what we're here for. So number 25, first controversy, number 25 was Air Force, and number 25 was 24 was Tulane. Mm-hmm. That's important because the highest group of 6 champion gets to go to the New Year's Six Bowl. Air Force has been higher rated the last couple weeks in the Associated Press. They're undefeated. They were expected to be in that slot, but no, it's Tulane at 24. Remember, Tulane won the Cotton Bowl last year over USC. Number 23, it was Kansas State. Number 22, Oklahoma State. Number 21, Kansas. So a run of Big 12 there. 20 is USC, 19 UCLA, 18 Utah, 3 Pac-12 in a row, 17 Tennessee, 16 Oregon State. Then we get to a couple of 2-loss teams, 15 Notre Dame, 14 LSU. I'm sure that'll be a topic of conversation at Irish Breakdown, given Brian Kelly over at LSU nowadays. 13 to finish it off is Louisville, 12 Missouri, and 11 Penn State. Let's talk from 11 through 25. Bryan Driskell, the floor is yours.
Well, I mean, obviously, as a Notre Dame guy, I thought Notre Dame was a few spots too low. Not that ultimately it's going to matter. The odds of a 2-loss team that's not going to play in a conference championship getting into the college football playoff would require a level of chaos that I don't even think I could explain right now. But I did feel they deserve to be higher. I'm good with Air Force and Tulane. I mean, you're going to need a group of 5, and if you're a playoff committee and you're trying to create matchups that people are going to want to care about, it would be smart to have one of those teams actually ranked. And I actually like Air Force this year. I think I have Air Force in my top 20. I do a weekly Irish Breakdown top 25 because, you know, when you look at the teams they've played and beat, it's, yes, they don't have any Power 5 wins, but they've played some good group of 5 teams so far and won convincingly. And then I believe this past weekend, one without the quarterback, a very convincing win at Colorado State. You know, beat a very good Wyoming team, in my opinion, one of the better group of 5 teams. And then the teams that they're better than, like San Jose State and San Diego State, who's not good, so Utah State, they've smashed. And so I really like this Utah State or this Air Force team. And I believe they won 3 or 4 in a row against Power 5 teams, mostly bowl games. So I like that ranking.
Kansas State, Oklahoma. I was going to say, the Air Force has a 12-game winning streak dating back to last year as well. So
Troy Calhoun's doing a great job at Air Force. He is one of the most underrated and underappreciated coaches in college football. And if you notice, they haven't been able to schedule a lot of Power 5 games recently, and there's a reason why. You know, I wouldn't want to play that team. My biggest –
Go ahead,
Bill.
Well, no, I mean, the last 5 years, I looked this up. We have a feature, Sporting News, coming out about the Air Force later this week. They have the 6th best record in the FBS since 2019, and the 5 teams ahead of them are Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, Michigan, and Notre Dame. So I think they were kind of disrespected in these rankings. I think they should be ranked as high as number 16. I think they absolutely should be the top group of 5 team, and they have the best rushing offense, which, well, they were in triple option. And then they have the 3rd best defense. They're playing the best complementary football for what they do. And you'll have to read about it later this week. They were a little disrespected, no doubt.
Bill, I had them 16th in my IB top 25. So we're on the
Look at
same
you.
page with where Air
Yeah.
Force is. I mean,
Good.
because it's not just that you're winning all your games, because Liberty's all won all their games, and I don't have them in my top 25 because they're not playing the quality group of fives, and they're kind of barely winning every week. Utah, for the most part, is smacking people, and that's what I like. They're a good football team. You guys tell me this. My biggest beef with their, I think Notre Dame should be a couple slots higher. I think they should definitely be ahead of LSU. If you look at game control, Notre Dame ranks 5th according to the ESPN metric. They're 5th in game control. Notre Dame's schedule right now ranks 11th, whereas LSU's is 5th, which is close. Remaining strength of schedule, LSU's is higher, but Notre Dame has bet more good wins, and their game control, they're 5th, and LSU's 11th. LSU has a great offense, the best offense in college football, in my opinion, especially once Logan Diggs got in there. But their defense ranks 75th in scoring, where Notre Dame ranks 10th in scoring defense and 12th in scoring offense. And I did it. Here's a fun stat for you, Troche. I think you'll like this one. There are 3 teams in college football that right now rank in the top 15 in scoring offense and scoring defense and yards per play on offense and yards allowed on defense. And that is against FBS only teams. And that's Notre Dame, Michigan, and Georgia. Now, the reason I included only FBS games, because if you include FCS games, it's only Notre Dame. So I had to expand it to make it less Notre Dame bias. But I think they should have been higher. My biggest beef, guys, and I gave you a little taste before the show started. It is ridiculous that Tennessee is ranked 17th. They're barely top 25 to me. It's even more ridiculous that they're ahead of Utah. Identical records. Utah has wins over number 19 and number 20, one of them on the road. They have, and then they have a mutual opponent. They both played Florida. Tennessee got smacked by Florida. Utah smacked Florida. So I'm having a very hard time understanding how that one came to be, guys. And if you look at the strength of schedule, Utah's has been tougher so far. So you can't explain that one to me. I don't quite understand how Utah is not ranked ahead of Tennessee and why Tennessee, what is the justification for having Tennessee, a 6-2 team with 0 wins over top 25 teams in the you could make a better case they shouldn't be in at all before you should, and they're in the top 20. Thoughts on that, guys?
That's some Utah recency bias, right? Because Utah did not look good this weekend. They've got quarterback issues. They've had to rely on defense. That's not the sexy way to win. So I think the eye test does not go in Utah's favor. But yeah, I think, Tennessee had 2 games, 2 tests, 2 long road losing streaks. They had an opportunity to break at Florida and at Alabama, and they didn't do either one of them. And, they're hanging their hat on a win against Kentucky. Kentucky's, iffy.
Not ranked.
Right.
They're not in there.
So,
when I look, they're not in there.
So, I can see the case for Utah over Tennessee.
The committee likes the SEC, as usual. They have 6 SEC teams in there, like they have 6 Pac-12 teams. That's the most of any conference, and that's one of those head-to-heads. You're right. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. Utah beat Florida, and Florida hammered Tennessee. So if you really value that, that's one of there's about 3 or 4 instances of head-to-heads where they didn't do it right. Well, they did or they didn't, and we'll get to the other one later. But in this one's pretty straightforward. If you want to say we value the head-to-heads, like right below it, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, that's fine, right? Didn't Oklahoma State beat Kansas State, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct, yeah.
So they did it right there. If they're 22-23, if they flip Tennessee, Utah 17-18, I'm fine there. But I think Bill's right that we just watched Utah get destroyed at home.
Sure.
And that's the latest thing in our heads.
But the committee always tells us we don't look at the most recent game. We don't look at head-to-head. We look at the overall resume, and then we start over every week. How can you start over every week if you're putting as much emphasis on that? And, that's my biggest thing, Bill, is there's an inconsistency to how they apply the standards to different teams. And we'll get into more of that when we get into the top 10. So that's just kind of my issue. Obviously they rank the SEC. They value the SEC. LSU's the highest ranked 2-loss team. Don't think they should be. Tennessee's ranked higher than Utah. Don't think they should be. My thing is you're now bringing in your subjective opinion about the SEC And it's as if they're like completely ignoring the fact that the SEC was the worst Power 5 conference in non-conference games this year. And it's like that's just being completely ignored.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be, because that's how you should be able to gauge, okay, how do we view how these teams are doing in conference, right? Because I've heard people say, well, the ACC sucks this year. Well, based on what? Look, they're always losing these bad teams. I'm like, yeah, but the ACC did great non-conference. Maybe the ACC is just better than you think it is, and they're just beating each other up, which is what I think is going to happen in the Pac-12 for the next month.
Right. And we've been worried about that all season, waiting for the Pac-12 to kind of beat each other up. So let's go through the top 10. Before we do that, though, I got my Troche trivia that we will revisit at the end of the show. Bryan, are you ready for this? You and Bill can go head-to-head. We have had 9 college football playoffs, okay? Tonight's the initial ranking. This refers to the initial rankings, the 9 initial rankings. How many times has a team come from outside the initial top 4 to win the national championship? Out of 9 years, how many times has the team come outside the initial top 4 to win the national championship? We will answer that at the end of the show. So here's the top 10. The first top 10. Number 10, Ole Miss, speaking of the SEC. Number 9, Oklahoma. Number 8, Alabama. Number 7, Texas. Number 6, Oregon. That's the last number one loss team. And now we get into the 5 undefeateds. We got 5, Washington. 4, Florida State. 3, Michigan. 2, Georgia. And 1, Ohio State. So Ohio State earns the top spot. They have the best resume. Not a huge surprise if they were going to emphasize resume versus eye test. Ohio State doesn't necessarily look like the best team all the time, but they have 2 huge wins. They looked good against Notre Dame. They looked good against Penn State. They have not looked good like consistently like Michigan. Michigan has a weak, resume to date. Georgia, similar. Doesn't have much of a resume so far. So let's start with the top 4. Okay, Ohio State, Bill. You had Georgia number 1 over the weekend, but as you studied it over the next couple of days, I think you started to come around to Ohio State. And when you saw the Buckeyes, you weren't surprised.
No, I mean their record of all their opponents is 58-39. That's the best of the top 6. The record of the teams they've played, 37-28. That's the best of the top 6. But I would caution everybody here that within the next 2 weeks, Georgia's going to leapfrog them. If they beat Missouri, which, by the way, Kirby Smart's sitting in a locker room somewhere, whether he's talking to his team or he's talking to himself, he's going to say, oh, by the way, you're number 2. They're going to hear that for the next 96 hours. And I think they're going to beat Missouri by about 100 points now. So within 2 weeks, I think Georgia will be number 1. And we can say, well, yeah, the record of the teams they've played is bad, but the record of the teams they have left is the best of the 4. I don't have any major problems with this top 4 at all, because I think 1, 2, and 3 are interchangeable, and I think there's a gap before you get to Florida State. And we can talk about Michigan all we want, but here's my thing with them. They say their record of the teams they've played, 31-32. It's not as bad as Florida State, Washington, or Oregon, so you can't go there. And they're beating teams by 5 touchdowns a game. So they're number 3 or number 2. I would have done Georgia, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida State. I did that earlier in the week, but I also said if you do it this way, that's fine. They're valuing Ohio State's resume. That's great.
Shouldn't that matter? I mean, shouldn't who you beat matter? I mean, when you're talking about Michigan, their resume is what? We're beating up a bunch of teams where your 2 best opponents are UNLV and Rutgers.
Well, I mean, Rutgers has won 6 games. Like Nebraska and Minnesota have won 5 games. They haven't. It's not their fault. Their schedule's set up like this, though. And
but that's part of. Well, it is their fault because they have control over who they play non-conference. Ohio State chose to play Notre Dame. Michigan chose to back out of a UCLA game.
Michigan chose to play Notre Dame for like 30 years. I mean, so that's the other one there.
How many times has Michigan backed out of that? Notre Dame broke it off once.
Right. I mean, they've chose to play. I mean, it's even without that like huge non-conference game, I mean, they're beating teams by 35 points per game. The other thing of note that I noticed is Boo Corrigan passed the buck on it, right? The sign stealing allegations.
Sure.
What did he say? It's not that's an NCAA problem. It's not, they didn't discuss it in the room. So yeah, I mean, but Michigan,
I think that's fair, don't you? I mean, right now there's nothing formal. There's been no formal charge. It's just an investigation.
It is
right?
what it is. And I think Michigan at 3 is fair based on what you guys have said. But again, they're going to find out over the next 4 weeks. It's not going to change for them this week against Purdue. And I'm not as high on Florida State, Washington. I do think that it's them 3 gap, Florida State, Washington, Oregon. I think there's a gap between the 3s.
So can I ask a question, Bill? What's the criteria by which we should be viewing these rankings?
I look at a couple things. I mean, to me, it's who you've played. It's I believe in game control a little bit. Like if you're going out, I mean, we can be honest about Ohio State a little bit. They're muddy at times. Yeah, they got
they're ranked 2 in game control.
Right, but I mean, do you think it was pretty against Wisconsin? Was it pretty against Maryland? I mean, like Michigan is demolishing teams, demolishing Rutgers. I mean, the Michigan State game was over.
They were winning 14-7 at halftime against Rutgers.
Is Michigan number 1 in game control? I haven't seen this metric.
Yeah, well, they also have the number 111 strength of schedule. So when you're really good, it's going to be easier to control that schedule compared to Ohio State.
Yeah, they haven't been tested at all. Yeah.
Right. So that's fair. And then Ohio State, but I mean, like, was it pretty against Penn State? They grinded.
Penn State is better than anyone that Michigan has played so far, though. That's the whole point.
Well,
I mean, you know what I think? You know what I think Ohio State's being punished by is because they're not winning the way they used to.
Mm-hmm.
Because they're not. They used to be that sexy, high-scoring, beating teams 60-10, but then whenever they played somebody good, they'd get beat because the last couple of years because they weren't physical. This is more of a vintage Ohio State team, although they still don't run the way old Ohio State teams. But as far as like winning with great defense, and to me, so they're not as sexy as they've been in the past. I think that's the thing that hurts Ohio State to me. And so you said you're okay with Ohio State being number 1, though, right?
Yeah, I am. I'm okay with any one of those first 3 teams being number 1. Where I'm getting our SN basketball writer Mike DeCourcy's picking at me currently. I haven't picked up my phone yet on Twitter. He likes Washington at 4, and I'm like, why? Like I've watched Washington the last 2 weeks, and I don't like what I see.
But the resume, it's supposed to be your entire resume. Right? Not the how are you the most 2 recent weeks, because now you're saying we're going to put more emphasis on that than we did a really good win over Oregon. Right? Yeah, and if you compare Michigan and Washington have a common opponent. Right? Now Michigan beat Michigan State 49-0, Washington beat them 41-7, but if you actually look at the game, 30 seconds left in the game, Washington takes a knee at the 10, Michigan punches it in at the 10 in less than that. Michigan outgained Michigan State by about 280 yards. Washington outgained them by over 400 yards, right? They both played at Michigan State. So, I mean, if we're going to look at resume, I mean, well, they didn't win this one as sexy. They didn't beat the bad teams as good as Michigan beat the bad teams. I think the fact that they've beaten good teams should matter more than they're not as sexy in 2 games against bad teams, which I would say is a little bit of a letdown after having a huge win, something Michigan hasn't had to face yet this year.
That's true, but if you add the combined record of their opponents, Michigan is better than Washington. Their opponent's record is better than Washington.
Yeah, well, one quick note on Rutgers. Mm-hmm. They have 6 wins. One of them's in FCS. The 5 FBS wins are against teams that have a combined record of 14-26, and none of them have a winning record. So those 6 wins by Rutgers are a little bit of a paper tiger.
Yeah. Right. But look at the last month for Washington. Arizona. I like Arizona, by the way. I've told Bill this all week. They win by a touchdown. Oregon.
I was not shocked they beat Oregon State this past weekend.
Oregon, no, they're tight. Arizona State 15-7, needed a pick 6 in the 4th quarter. Played terrible that night. Nobody can run from that fact that Washington played awful that night. Stanford played awful. Stanford ran a reverse pass that was underthrown. or we might be talking about Washington and where they stack up with Ole Miss and Penn State instead of where they stack up with these unbeaten teams. So they got to, but they, again, another team, Brian, Bill, they play USC, they play Oregon State. We'll find out. I think they're going to lose this weekend. We'll get into that tomorrow.
It wouldn't shock me. I mean, depends on which USC team shows up, right? It wouldn't shock me. That's the thing that's going to be interesting about this final month, guys, is just the gauntlet these Pac-12 teams have to go through. Like, they completely backloaded this schedule for like all these teams. And if Washington doesn't run the table or does run the table, they got to beat Oregon in a rematch, which is going to be tough.
Oregon,
I think Oregon was
right now.
Oregon to me was I thought the better coached team won that day, not the better team on the field of players. Right? We talked about that in our show. It's like if they were playing this weekend, I'd pick Oregon to win. Just if just based on talent and those type of things, because Dan Lanning's got to get his head out of his what sometimes when it comes to some of the decisions he made. But they did win, right? And what matters is at the end of the day, did you get that W? And that's, to me, what it boils down to. Like, you can say, like, you can talk about record and things like that, but at the end of the day, one team's best win is over Rutgers and UNLV. The other team has beaten a top 6 team. However you think of how it happened, they won that game. That should matter. Same with Florida State. They dominated a top 15 team. So yeah, they had some. So like basically, we're punishing teams because who have to play good teams that sometimes they don't show up against the bad teams the week after they beat somebody that was really good. It's a lot easier to get up for games when you just know no one you play can beat you. Right? It's like Florida State 2013, kind of similar type of deal.
Bill Bender, Oklahoma versus Texas. Thoughts on that? Texas, both teams 1 loss. Texas lost to Oklahoma. Texas is ahead of Oklahoma in the rankings.
That's fine. I mean, because Sark went right at it and said it in his press conference today. He said, I think we have the best win. Got a point, man. Not too many people go down to Bryant-Denny and win. And he kind of took some not so veiled shots at the SEC on the way with it. And Texas is going to use that a lot because they're going to need that because they lost a game. And if they're the 1-loss Big 12 champion and they're stacking up against a 1-loss Pac-12 champion, for example, he's going to cash that Alabama card often. And he should. And I think they've got another thing, man. The Big 12 had a lot of teams ranked. They had their little block there with K-State, Oklahoma State, Kansas. If Texas can sweep all those teams, I don't know that they play Oklahoma State. They may play them in the Big 12 championship. But
Texas?
Yeah. I mean, Oklahoma State's a very viable team to go to the Big 12 championship, which is wild because they got blown out by South Alabama.
They don't play them, by the way.
They don't. They could at the end. And yeah, so I think Texas over Oklahoma is fine. And if it's recency bias, yeah, Oklahoma. It's the same thing I just said about Washington. They haven't looked. Tell me that's one of the top 7 teams in the country. What you've watched the last 2 weeks?
But I think the overall resume is not as good too, Bill. Like, yes, they've got that one win over Texas in the head-to-head, but I try to look at it like not so much the head-to-head, but what did that head-to-head give you from a quality win standpoint? Well, that's a really good win. Texas is a really good win. Texas also beat Bama. I would argue that Bama's win over Texas was more impressive because I thought Texas was clearly the better team that day, where I just think Oklahoma and Texas were kind of just back and forth, right? But then it's also what's your next best win? And your next best win for Texas is you beat Kansas 40-14. That team just beat Oklahoma. Right. And so when you look at Oklahoma, what's Oklahoma's next best win after Texas? It's SMU. That's your next best win.
And that was an ugly win to boot.
Right. Exactly. Their other wins are Tulsa stinks. Cincinnati's not good. UCF's not good. They lost to Kansas. They've played 3 good teams all year. They're 2-1 in those games. And one of those good teams is I'd probably say SMU's in my top 5 of Group of 5 this year. Like
they're not bad. They're good.
They've got a good defense actually this year. They play a little defense this year, but that's the thing is the overall resume for Oklahoma is just not as good. So I agree with you, Bill, certainly on that one. This weekend could help them a little bit, though, right? Both teams have tough tests this weekend. Both of them could lose. That's the other thing. I mean, Texas plays at home against Kansas State without Quinn Ewers. right? They could both catch L's this weekend. Those are going to be some really good games.
There's 5 teams tied for first place in the Big 12 right now, and 4 of them are playing each other this weekend in the 2 games that you just mentioned. So that'll be interesting. Did you guys pick up that in the top 12 of the rankings, 11 of the 12 next year will be in the Big 10 or the SEC?
I picked up on that because some dude I follow,
11 of 12.
That guy right there on Twitter tweeted it out. That's how I know it as a fact, because you tweeted it out. Yeah.
How crazy is that? I mean, talk about the Big Two. Now, a lot of those, Oregon, Washington, they're all losing their quarterbacks and everything. And, I think that will affect things a little bit. But that's a kind of a scary thing for people who are, enjoy a little more regional, national parity, to not have all the power in the Big 10 and the SEC.
Yeah. Well, I would argue. Go ahead, Bill. Sorry about that.
That's very good for the Big Ten for some of us not so shy Big Ten homers over here. Yeah. I mean, well, here was my other thing I was going to tell you, Brian, not to interrupt, but I got in this like late night text fight Saturday night with some of my buddies. They're Notre Dame fans, by the way, and they were. One of them was just he's a Big Ten basher. He's not apologetic about it, and he was going at me, and I just said Notre Dame, and he was like defending the Big 12 all of a sudden. He's like, oh, yeah, Texas and Oklahoma. And I'm like, very clear to me that Notre Dame would walk through the Big 12 this year. I think they wouldn't lose a game in the Big 12. So I'm defending Notre Dame. But he was like going at just the overall strength of the Big 10. And I'm like, no, I never said the entire conference was strong. I just said those top 3 teams are all good enough to beat anybody in the Big 12. Wherever you want to play it, Jerry World, Kansas City Stadium, play them there. And I think all of them would win. I think Penn State and Texas would be a toss-up.
There are years, Bill, I would have argued with you about the Big 12 versus the Big 10, because I'm someone who puts value in depth of a conference, not just that you have the 2 best. The problem is the Big 12 is down this year. It's not as good as it's been in the past, where, Oklahoma State's good, but they're not that team from 2021. Kansas State, they're good, but look, they played a non-conference game against Power 5 and lost to Missouri, right? So I don't think the Big 12 is as strong. TCU's down this year. K-State's not as good as they were last year. Oklahoma State's not as good as they were 2 years ago. So you can't really use that argument against the Big 10 with the Big 12. I think you can if the Pac-12, we could have that conversation with the Pac-12. But I don't think this year you can make that argument with the Big 12. It's not the year, because I think, to your point, the top 2 teams in the Big 10, to me, are better than the top 2 teams in the Big 12, and then the rest of it's just kind of like neither of them are any good.
Iowa State is tied for the Big 12 lead, and they couldn't get out of Athens, Ohio, with a win. I'm just saying.
Right. This is not the year to make. And I mean, look, Oklahoma State's really good. They lost 30-7 to South Alabama. This is not the year. Texas Tech got beat by Wyoming. This is not the year to make that argument for the Big 12. In past years, I've actually made that argument before. This is just not the year for that, because the league isn't as good.
Well, and the committee has cast their vote for at least the Pac-12 over the Big 12, because if you look at the top rankings, they've got Washington and Oregon ahead of Texas and Oklahoma. And then you look at towards the bottom of the top 25, you've got UCLA, Oregon State, Utah, and USC, all just ahead of Kansas, Oklahoma State, Kansas State. So it's Pac-12 over Big 12 at the top, and Pac-12 over Big 12 kind of in the middle. So that's how the committee feels, at least at this point. So thoughts on Penn State, Brian? I think you had some thoughts on that you wanted to share before the show. You talked to us a little bit about.
Yeah, I think Penn State is getting the benefit of, they're a 6-1, 7-1 Big Ten team. And they're also getting the benefit of the doubt based on what people thought they would be preseason. And I'm one. I had Penn State as a dark horse Big Ten title team. Honestly, I thought maybe if some things go their way, got a lot of athletes on defense, got arguably the best running back room in college football. You've got a talented young quarterback that, they can ask the game manager, getting Dante Cephas at wide receiver. You got good tight ends. You bring almost everybody back on the O-line. I expected Penn State to take a jump. They've regressed a little bit, in my opinion, this season. And yeah, they're 7-1, but they've really only played one good team, and they got thoroughly outplayed in that game. I mean, it was 20-12, but anyone that watched that game, I don't see how you ever thought Penn State had a chance to win that football game. right? Really at any point in time. And so when you
Every
look
time
at
it was third down, they said, "Punt team, get ready."
I mean, it was a thorough, thoroughly got outplayed. So you're building your resume off of a win over Iowa. Well, that was a quality win, but Illinois wins not that great. They didn't look great against West Virginia. You had to put a garbage touchdown on the end just to clear, just to cover the spread. And then they're coming off a game against Indiana where it's tied in the fourth quarter. So Penn State to me is ranked where they are off reputation. There are 2 lost teams that I would rank ahead of Penn State. I would rank both Notre Dame and LSU ahead of Penn State. They're not a great football team. They've just beat a schedule that is just simply not good. I mean, losing to Northwestern at halftime. And by the way, that guy's doing a phenomenal job with that team. When you consider, even with Pat Fitzgerald there, I would have said they'd have a hard time getting 4 wins with that roster. He's doing a nice job.
Steve Greenberg with the Chicago Sun-Times had a take on that today, and he's a SN alum, and he's right. I mean, he's making a case to take that job full time. So good for Coach Braun. My thoughts on Penn State are the same as always, that they're good. They're a really good team. They've got a good roster, a lot of good players. Their defense is legit, but it's the Ohio State-Michigan thing. And I say it to Bill every budget meeting. Wake me up when they beat one of those 2. And they'll have their chance next week. That'll be an all-in game for that program, because if Michigan goes into Penn State and either it doesn't matter how, if they escape by 9 or they escape by 15, then it'll be the same old narratives about James Franklin. So, yeah, I mean, I could see that. I could see LSU and Penn State being a toss-up, but I still don't like LSU's defense, Brian. And they got –
Oh, I get that. Yeah, I
don't
get that.
like and I think that would be a toss-up game. I think Penn State Notre Dame would be an awesome Orange Bowl at this point. I mean,
let me ask you this question, Bill. How many points do you think LSU scores against Penn State's defense? Which is good. We're very good in some ways, but how much do you think they score against them?
I think we'll find out this weekend, because I think Alabama's defense and Penn State's defense are similar, and LSU is going down there this weekend.
My thing is, you look at LSU, you're going to have to score 30 to beat them, right? Unless if you're Penn State, in my opinion. And I just don't know right now, because the biggest disappointment for me for Penn State is I really thought their offensive line was going to take a jump this year. And you look at the way they finished last year and the way that they manhandled Utah in the Rose Bowl, I really thought their run game was going to take a jump. And they haven't. That's been probably the most disappointing thing for me, is just to see that. But there's, like you said, I think the Maryland game this weekend is big for them. I think that they've got to get back. They've got to get some momentum back against a quality Maryland team before they head to Ann Arbor. I think that's going to be big for them, in my opinion.
Let's take a quick look at what a 12-team playoff would look like based on these rankings. I did this last year as well. It was kind of a fun exercise. The first round matchups, again, based on this initial poll, would be number 12, Tulane, at number 5, Michigan. Tulane would get the last spot because they're the 6th highest ranked conference champ. 11, Penn State, at 6, Oregon. We would have number 10, Ole Miss, at number 7, Texas, in the Arch Manning Bowl, or the Nick Saban former offensive coordinators bowl with Kiffin and Sark. And then number 9, Oklahoma, would be at number 8, Alabama. So I get excited whenever I kind of do that 12 team. I can't wait for it to come. Brian, I don't know your stat. Bill likes the BCS where there was only 2 teams. So 12 is a little far for him. I don't know where you stand on that.
I was against 12 initially, but I'm more in favor of it now than I am of the current system. I mean, Bill, you and I did a show where I told you what my system should be. Look, you go back to the old bowl tie-ins, play the bowl games, then pick your best 4, and that's how I would do it, right? But I like 12 better than the current 4, because I feel, especially with the transfer portal, there's going to be so much more. There's going to be more parity. Where in the past I've said, guys, there's rarely 4 teams that are able to win a championship, much less 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, right? I mean, there's been years where it's like there's 2 teams. It's going to be either LSU or Bama. Like, hey, Notre Dame, give them a good game, but it's going to be Alabama versus Clemson in the title game, right? In 2019, maybe Ohio State has a chance to beat Clemson. That was a 3rd team, but, Oklahoma had no chance to beat LSU that year. I mean, I wasn't shocked that, maybe an extra touchdown or two than what I thought they would score, but that was never going to be a close game. I think when you look at the portal and in the NIL, it's changed the landscape of college football in a way where I'm now more supportive of it, because you are seeing, to me, I look at if LSU can run the table, what does that mean? It means their defense got better, right? Because you're not going to beat Bama and Georgia and get in the playoff if your defense doesn't get better, right? Well, in past, Notre Dame, for example, is another one. I think Notre Dame is a really good team that had a bad night at Louisville. That's what I think of Notre Dame. And in the past, they're out now. They're out in a 12-team playoff as long as they handle business against Clemson and Wake Forest and Stanford. You say, okay, now they're healthy, whatever. Now let's see what they can do. In past years, a team like that would have got smashed. 2019, Notre Dame makes college football playoff as an 11 seed. They're getting smashed in at the latest the second round. It's just, even 2021, Notre Dame to finish 5th. There's a huge gap between Notre Dame and the top 3 and 4 in that year in 2021. They just weren't a very good team. They played one good team all year, Cincinnati, and got smacked, right? I just think the game has changed a little bit. There's a little bit more parity because Florida State can just go to the portal and get Jared Traver, get Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson and Jared Verse and players like that, Fentrell Cypress, a corner, and just immediately get better as a program. Where in the past, it's going to take you, sometimes 5-6 years, depending on how bad of a situation you walked into. So I've come around on it, even though I'm very anti BCS. I mean, we've seen teams lose by 40 in their conference title game and still play in the BCS title game. I'm hard to pass on that one.
Well, I go ahead, finish first, because I've got 3.
I'm done. Go, bud.
Okay.
If you guys know, if you don't cut me off, Bill, I'm just going to keep talking. You know that. So you're have to jump in, baby.
The BCS never got it wrong with those top 2. I mean, we can get they maybe one time got it wrong. Most years it was right. 3 things for you guys. The one thing about the 12-team playoff that excites me, and you guys got to start listening to the comments. I'm reading the comments. Corey Dean, it's snowing in Perrysburg, Ohio. Shout out Perrysburg. They've got a really good youth lacrosse program up there. Also, did you look at what Toledo looked like tonight up in that part of the corner of the state in that Maction game? There's snow all over the place. So I am somewhat excited. I'm somewhat excited about the prospect of, I don't know, Florida or Tennessee, or no, maybe not Tennessee, whatever the hottest weather team in the SEC is, Georgia coming up to Wisconsin for a 5-12, or if somehow they get jobbed on their seed and they have to go up to Wisconsin and play. That would be fantastic. 2, your listeners a little further down, 8 teams would have been fine. 8 teams or 6 teams would have been better. We skipped a step to 12. To me, 6 is even a better number, but 8, like in a year like this year, because I argue with Bill all the time about the regular season part. So if we're pushing it, if we were arguing about who's number 8 right now, and then you look at the next 4 teams that are like the next 4 out, it's like Oklahoma, Ole Miss, Penn State, Missouri. Now these Big Ten that Big Ten game at Michigan, Penn State, that's for a 7 seed. It's not for an 11 seed where you go to Tulane. Well, Michigan-Tulane matchup, the only thing that interests me there is whether or not Connor Stallions is going to be in disguise on the sideline somewhere. I don't know. But yeah, 8's a better number. 6 is a better number than 12. 12 is too many because on any given year, there are not 12 teams that are capable of winning a national championship.
But I think this year is an example of, look at Notre Dame. They played Ohio State to the buzzer. They've had a good season. They lost a game to Louisville where they didn't play well. People think, 12 teams, everyone's going to get in. Notre Dame wouldn't get in. They're not in. They're 15 right now. So
but they could get in down the stretch here.
The season right now, they're not in. And they don't necessarily have an easy path, even if they win their next 3 or 4, to get into the top 11. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And if
they'll definitely get into the top 11, but top 8 would be much tougher. To your point. Yeah,
I still think even the top 12 and with the group of 5 is top 11, even to be a top 11 team, it's not as easy as everybody thinks it's going to be. Everybody thinks every college basketball team makes a Sweet 16, all the good ones. You look at the actual numbers, they don't. I mean, if someone makes a Sweet 16 3 years in a row, it's kind of a shock. It's shocking how few teams can do it. So my point is, I think 11 is a lot more difficult than people understand to get in. Notre Dame is not going to be in every year. People are talking about, oh, Notre Dame, they're not going to get a first round. They never get a home game because they're not going to get a first round bye or whatever. And I mean, they will get a home game, but they won't get the first round bye. And I'm like, how often do you think Notre Dame's going to finish in the top 4? It doesn't happen very often like that.
They've done it twice. Right, twice in the 10 years we've had a playoff. That's it, twice.
Right.
There'd have been more years they would have made it as a non-top 4 than as a top 4. And I think the other thing too, as a Notre Dame fan, this is something Vince D'Addario convinced me of why, because I was against, like, how can Notre Dame not get a bye? If they're one of the top 4, they should get in. But he's like, look, now you've eliminated the whole, well, you don't play a conference championship game. That's no longer a thing now, because, like, okay, fine, we can't get that bye because we don't have to face another really good SEC team or Big Ten team after playing the game.
Right.
So I'm okay with that. I came around to that. And I will say this, maybe, we've seen teams like USC 2016. I'll stand by this. That team would have been an 8 or 9 seed. By the end of the year, that USC team could have beat just about anybody in 2016. They started off 1-3. They made a quarterback change. They had some guys out. By the end of the year, that was a really good team that in an 16 playoff doesn't get in. So there have been some years, but most years they're not going to be 8 or 9 teams. But, I just think it gives some the years that there are, it's going to make for a lot of fun.
I would say go through the last 25 years of college football, and if you two can look me straight in the face and say there's 12 teams that could have won it that year.
Well, I've already said that that's not true. But what I'm saying is 25 years ago, there was not the transfer portal and NIL the way that there is now. That's my point.
Okay, I would even shorten it to the last 5. The last 3. I don't think there were 12 teams that could have won it last
year. So should I find the year where it was the deepest and say we'll go with that number? Is that what we do?
Well, that's why I'm saying it. That yes, because then it would be 6 to 8.
And 9.
And I'm good with that.
I'd say there's been years where there's 9.
But would you rather have 11 college football playoff games, or would you rather have 7 college football playoff games and 4 meaningless bowl games? Like, it's more good football. It's more win or go home football.
Yeah. Well, the 8 though, it makes more sense too, because then you put that first round on campus, and then to do the next 3 as bowl games.
The thing is, though, with that is you're going to have years where there's debates where 8 versus 9 is going to be a debate.
Right.
That's 8 versus 10 is going to be a debate, right? So that's where I think is, like, if you're arguing that number 13 should have been in, like, come on, guys.
Exactly.
Maybe they should have been. But I do think, because there would be some 8-9s, like, Bill, there's a chance Notre Dame could finish 9th or 10th this year, depending on how things play. And I'm like, I'm sorry, that's a team that could beat a lot of teams in the playoffs. Maybe they can't win it all. I don't know if they could win 4 in a row, but they could do damage, right? And I think that's where I kind of like it, is even if there's teams that can't win it all, is there a team that could get in as a 9 or a 10 seed and sort of like the NCAA tournament, where, maybe a team starts off bad early in the year, they're not good in the non-conference, but then they got some freshmen that get going, and all of a sudden by like Michigan, I go back to 91, 92, right? I mean, that team by the end of the year was really good. But if we were going back to the old school way where there was only 16 teams got in, period, that Michigan team never gets a chance to show how good that they were with the Fab Five, right? Like, so sometimes you're going to have those years where maybe this team can't win it, but they were good enough to knock Bama off in the quarters or something like that.
And those last teams in that you're talking about, the 10, 11, 12 seeds, they don't have to play a top 4 to start.
Right.
So they have a chance to win a game. Right. And winning one game is big for any kind of program and generating excitement and momentum and everything like that. So
I would mirror it like I told both of you guys, the best football weekend in all of sports is the divisional round of the NFL playoffs, because it's 4 games. Those games are awesome. Then you get on, you would still theoretically be on campus for the AFC Championship and NFC Championship. But my favorite football weekend of the year, and I cover college football for a living, the favorite one is when those 4 divisional games are going off, because you're one step closer to the Super Bowl. You've got through that first round of the playoffs where there are I've watched some garbage wild card games. I've watched, Taylor Heineke and at start for Washington there have been some Connor Cook started a playoff game for the Raiders against the Texans. It was terrible. But when you get to that second round, that's when it's business. That's when it's Bills and Bengals. And, this year, like this year, it'll be like Dolphins and Bengals and Chiefs and Jaguars. It's going to be incredible. And if college football mirrored that, I'd be in. But I think the 12 teams is a little much. And Bill's right about a lot of it. It's great for opportunity. And it's the basketball analogy is great, Bill, because you're right. You don't guarantee the Sweet 16, but I can guarantee you that Duke, Kansas, and basketball's changed, but most Kansas, Duke, Michigan State, they're in. There's not a lot of consequence for a basketball regular season. I still want to see some consequence for losing in the college football regular season.
One of the consequences is you're an SEC team who didn't handle business early. Now you got to go up and play in 20-degree weather in South Bend, Indiana in December. That's the consequence to your regular season. I mean, because I made the same argument you did. Is it cheapens the regular season? But somebody made a point to me is like, there's now games that people just would not normally care about because your team's ninth that now all of a sudden a lot of people care about. And they're paying more attention. So it actually, there's less meaning for this is going to determine a championship. There's less on the line in regard to like 06 Michigan was the game. Michigan Ohio State was the game I would always point to. Like that game meant something. And they're like, yeah, it still kind of means something because you're trying to get the 1 seed because you don't have to play Bama in the second round or in the semis or whatever. And the reason I don't share the NFL example is because in the NFL, those wildcard games are getting teams that are barely 500 because you only have 32 teams, right? It's a little bit of a different. Just the Power 5 alone is 65 teams. So the teams that are making it at 10 to 12 are much better teams in college football than teams that are making the wild card. Wasn't there a team that went 8-9 last year and made the wild card? That'd be like a team going 7-5 and making the playoff now, which is why I don't think there should be automatic berths, by the way. That's why I think because there's going to be that year UConn gets in at 8-4. Remember that when UConn played in the Orange Bowl at 8-4 because they had an automatic bid. That's why I'm not a fan of automatic bids, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I feel like Brady's Bucks won the division at 8-9 and got a home playoff game at 8-9 against like the 11-5 Cowboys or something like that. Like it didn't make any sense.
There's no equivalent to that in college football in a 12-team playoff because if you get how many teams make it in the NFL now? It's 12. Right?
Pitt played in an ACC championship game with like 5 losses.
Right, but they wouldn't have been in the playoff. They wouldn't have been in the college football playoff, though.
True, but that's still getting to that weekend essentially. Yeah, but it's the same thing.
That's happening now. Whether you play in a 2-team playoff, a 4-team playoff, or an 8-team playoff, Pitt's still playing in the ACC championship game.
There has to be a Big Ten West champion.
Right, but that team's not playing in the playoff. That's the only now. That's also why I don't think you should have automatic bids because I don't want to see some 8-4 Pitt team that upset whoever get in the playoff. That's the other thing. That's why I'm not a big fan of automatic bids. Just get the 12 best teams. But 12 teams getting the NFL playoffs. Or how many is it? 8?
14
each side. 14. That's over a third of the league. 12 teams in college football is less than 10%. So to me, it's a little bit different than, because you're not going to have a 7-5, 8-4, 6-6 team getting in the college football playoff. You're just not. In my opinion.
Josh made a good point in the comments section too that I meant to make earlier that more playoff games means less players skipping bowl games.
That's true.
Which we're seeing, more and more of year after year. So, all right, well, very good.
was not making that stupid comment he made about Caleb Williams sitting out if there's a 12-team playoff because USC still has a very good shot if they run the table to still be playing for a championship. So you don't hear dumb stuff like that anymore either. That's a good point, Bill. Very good point.
Great. Yeah. So, all right, let's get back to our Troche trivia, and then we can let everybody get out of here. The trivia question was that we've had 9 college football playoffs, and the initial ranking was tonight. So we've had 9 initial rankings. How many times in the initial rankings has a team in the initial top 4 gone on to win the national championship? Or how many times a team outside the initial top 4 has gone on to win the national championship? Do you have a guess, Bryan?
I can only think of one. like off the top of my head, that's Ohio State in 2014. I'm trying to go through and because so many of the years were Bama, right? I mean, so
I think one is Ohio State for sure.
yeah, because they started 16th.
I have a feeling like Alabama started out of the top 4 one of those years because they lost to Ole Miss, and I think they won. So they may have been like
That
hovering
would have
at
been
like
what,
5 to
16?
7.
Would that have been
15,
16?
15 or
15?
one of those years they lost and they were out of the top 5.
And then wasn't
They
Mississippi
climbed back.
State in the top 5 or in the top 4 that year? Wasn't in 15? Wasn't that the year that Mississippi State started in the top 4?
Mississippi State was the initial number 1 of the initial playoff, 2014.
Right.
So I think I'm going to guess, Brian, if you want to guess 1, we can. I'm going to guess 2.
No, I'm thinking there has to be 2, right? There's got to be one of those years. Was it just a 1? Ohio State? Okay.
Ohio State 2014 is the only team to come outside the top 4. In fact, only one team was ranked 4. That was the next year. Bama was ranked 4 and went on to win the national championship. Everyone else has been inside the top 3.
That won it, you said, correct? That won it?
And went on to win the national. The national champion in the last 7 years has been in the initial top 3. So congratulations to Ohio State.
The first year, Bill, the
Georgia
title
and Michigan. There's your top 3. There's your national champion.
The title game in 14 was between 2 teams that weren't in the top 5 or top 4 to begin. Because Oregon was not in the top 4 to begin that year either, I don't believe, in 14. Right. So I think that year the teams that played for the title, you were going to get a winner that wasn't in the top 4 no matter who won
either way
title game in 2014. So
that's great. So, yeah. All right. Well, this was really fun. Thank you, Bryan, for joining us, coming over from Irish Breakdown. Thank to everyone for listening to the CFB Nation All-America podcast presented by Twisted Tea. Check out all of Bryan's podcasts over at Irish Breakdown and his writing at irishbreakdown.com. We will be back later in the week to preview Week 10's games. So enjoy the rest of your day, and we will see you soon.